With the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X crash in the party, industry experts like Perry Saturn and Michael Tractor are saying that the Switch is pretty much boned if Nintendo doesn't come out with an upgraded model within the next 5 minutes. But according to Nintendo of America's president Doug Bowser, there's not gonna be a Switch Pro anytime soon. And if you ask me, I think that he's not only telling the truth, but quite frankly, I honestly think that's what's best for everybody. So crack open a can of horse cheese, press the subscribe button if you like games, goofs, and glory, and allow me, the man of 1,004 holds, Cameron all one word, to tell you why a Switch Pro ain't happening anytime soon, and why that's actually a good thing. Okay, so even if a Nintendo Switch Pro really was coming out sooner than later, I'd bet my stepdad's lunch money that Doug Bowser would have still told us that it isn't in the works just to prevent the base model from taking a sales dip. But still though, I tend to believe that the old kook ain't lying this time around, because the Switch Pro really just isn't necessary right now. Like, sure, it would be nice to be able to play games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, or for games like Doom Eternal to pop up in ass hair sooner, but even so, the Switch is still selling out the ass, and getting tons of great third-party games that are less demanding anyway, so why rush an upgrade when it's clearly not necessary? And look, I'm not saying that it's ever a good idea to be complacent with success, or that a Switch Pro wouldn't lead to even more sales, but even though a lot of people would probably love a significant upgrade sooner than later, there's also a lot of Switch owners who'd feel ripped off if they couldn't play certain games without buying the upgrade. Granted, that's always going to be an issue, but still though, it's going to be less and less of a problem over time. But even beyond that, a longer wait would also result in a better upgrade anyway, so if things aren't that big of a problem right now, then why rush it? Sure, the PS5 and Xbox Series X are roaming the streets right now, and once games are being fully optimized for those consoles, then there's definitely going to be a lot fewer Switch ports than there are right now. But aside from a very small handful of titles that wouldn't have even come to the Switch anyway, most of these games are in fact being made for the PS4 and Xbone, and then just kind of being copied and pasted over to the next-gen hardware. Like, yeah, Cyberpunk 69 does botch a little more often on the older hardware, but it's not like the game's running smooth everywhere else. And besides, even though the Switch may not be able to handle all of the big third-party multiplats, it can still handle some of them. Plus, there's also all the first-party games that have always carried Nintendo consoles in the past anyway, and there's also still enough bullets left in the chamber to keep the base model afloat for at least a few more years. So when the Bowsman says that the current Switch is in the middle of its life cycle, I tend to believe him, although that's not to say that there won't be some minor upgrades like better screens, batteries, and things of that nature coming out in the meantime. In fact, he even straight up said that this would probably happen. Plus, it kinda sorta already has anyway, so if a significant upgrade's not happening anytime soon, then I suppose you might as well just give us a few minor upgrades to hold us over in the meantime. I mean, honestly, having an upgraded Switch model that could handle games like Final Fantasy VII and Cyberpunk might not even be possible at the moment without having the thing cost like $800 anyway, and if the upgrade's not gonna be that significant, then why bother? True, the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X didn't have any exclusive games, but since they weren't successors, those also didn't light the world on fire either, which made them pretty pointless in the long run if you ask me, even though it was nice that early adopters didn't have to upgrade to play new games. And seeing as how the Game Boy Color and new 3DS had exclusive games, I'd imagine that the same's gonna be true for the Switch Pro, which you might think makes it a full successor, but that's actually what I think that the Switch Pro should be. I mean, obviously they'd have to call it something better than the Switch Pro, but rather than abandon the original model, I think they could and should extend its life instead, just like they did with the other two low-key successors. And if you ask me, the best way to do that would be to have the cartridges and box art be mostly the same, and for all the first-party games to continue being made for the original model, albeit with faster load times and things like that if you played these games on the upgraded Switch, at least for another year or two anyway. This way, early adopters wouldn't feel nearly as ripped off, and it'd also mean that games made for the base Switch wouldn't be seen as last-gen like Okami-den, Kirby Mass Attack, Donkey Kong Country 3, Mega Man 6, and any other game that came late in a console's life cycle. Plus, it'd also give third parties a chance to make portable versions of all their AAA multiplats, which might sound like a bit much for some of the more demanding games run properly on a portable, but again, that's all the more reason why it's better not to rush an upgrade when things are currently going just fine on the base Switch, because the longer we hold out, then the better it'll eventually be when a Switch Pro/successor inevitably becomes to be. I mean, the new 3DS upgrade was nice, but aside from a few games, it didn't really make that much of a difference since it wasn't meant to expand the system's lifespan by more than like a few years. But a Switch upgrade, on the other hand, would need to show much more of a difference, and if one were to come out anytime soon, then it'd probably only be slightly better at best, and then it'd just be obsolete that much sooner anyway. And besides, while the PS5 and Series X might be seen as a reason for the Switch to upgrade sooner, I actually think that's all the more reason to hold off a bit longer since those two systems are going to be hogging the spotlight for a little while. I mean, no matter what kind of a Switch upgrade Nintendo comes out with in the near future, there's still going to be plenty of people who are going to buy one of Sony or Microsoft's consoles no matter what, and I'm sure that a good chunk of those people probably wouldn't have any money left over to buy a new Switch within the same time period anyway, so no matter how I look at it, I just can't think of any reason why Nintendo shouldn't treat the base model Switch like Ash Ketchum treated Pikachu when he was about to fight Lieutenant Surge's Raichu. Sure, evolving him into a stronger and entirely different Pokemon would've worked just fine, but why resort to such a drastic measure when you can still get so much more out of what you got? Obviously, the time will eventually come when Nintendo's gotta come out with some new hardware, but there's just no reason to do that in the foreseeable future, because no matter how much things heat up with the PS5 and Series X, Nintendo's still got plenty of secret weapons up their sleeves to buy them as much time as they need if the Switch sales start to dip that hard. I know some people might think that Nintendo's doomed once all those next-gen exclusives start creeping out, but you know what? As soon as a new game from Mario, Zelda, or like 10 other Nintendo franchises come out, the Switch is gonna start selling out the ass again, and if they don't got any new games ready for whatever reason, then they could always just sell a few million Game Boy or 64 Classic Edition consoles, and if all else fails and they need a few $100 million on the fly, then Nintendo could even just toss some older games into compilations again in like 5 minutes like they did with Super Mario 3D All-Stars. In fact, the main reason why I don't think Nintendo's re-releasing older games willy-nilly is specifically to save them for rainy days, but if you want to know more about that, then you might like my video about why Nintendo's so against putting 64, GameCube, and Wii games onto the Nintendo Switch. That is, of course, aside from Super Mario 3D All-Stars that they just yanked away from us after 6 months, thus proving my point. That's all for now, though. Let me know when you think the Switch's successor's coming out in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody at some point, but for now, I've kinda sorta gotta go feed my stepdad after setting his lunch money aside for this bet. See you later, crocodiles.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.